Today is February 18th, 2024. My name is Kelly Gu, and I'm here today with Bach Mai on behalf of the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University. And to start, please state your full name and where and when you were born.
Bach Mai, in Vietnamese, Bat Chang Mai, or Mai Chang Bat actually, but I was born in Houston, Texas on December 23rd, 1988.
And how would you describe the household you grew up in?
House that I grew up in, my household. This is probably one of the harder questions. How would I describe the house I grew up in? It was like my household, like the family, right? It was fine, standard. I think I shared many commonalities with many other Asian American immigrant families, and also with families of my generation. My parents did get divorced when I was quite young, which very common with many children of my kind of generation. It was fine. I think it was complicated, but there was a large family, there was a lot of people around, and growing up obviously in Houston with a large Vietnamese immigrant population here, there was also a lot of community as well. But, I had amazing aunts and uncles that also took care of me, especially my aunts. Obviously there was a bit of disconnect between my parents, which led to their divorce, but and I had 2 half-siblings from my mother's previous marriage who were much older than me, 8 and 9 years older. But overall, we lived in the suburbs, we lived in a perfectly nice neighborhood, and I felt safe, I was supported, I had family around, so it was fine. It was fine.
Thank you. And can you share any childhood memories?
Childhood memories are a fun one. Both so many memories, but none that really stand out. I think, memories ranging from my mother was very, and still is very, a big part of the Buddhist community here, whether it was arranging flowers with my mother at the temple, or I used to take road trips with my father every year to Disneyland, to Disney World, in fact, in Florida, or my father helping me to build things. He was an engineer, and so playing with Connects in particular, or my uncles, who my father's side really went into computer science, and I think we got exposed to computer technology a little earlier than some other kids, whether it was my uncle teaching me how to use MS-DOS when I was 6 or 7 to try to get into computer games or anything like that. Nothing that really stands out. There's just lots of memories. I think some of the more pertinent memories were, I knew I was gay when I was pretty young, or I don't know. It's hard to say that. You don't know what that means. You don't know what being gay means at that point. You just know you're different. And I think that feeling and that kind of, that recognition was there when I was very young, and that was something that definitely was there, and I think my family knew it, everyone knew it, and so it was something that was always present. But I say a lot about that process, which I don't think people talk enough about, which is, before you come out to everyone else and come out to the world, you have to come out to yourself, and that is the hardest thing. And so that process in itself of coming out to yourself in terms of understanding who you are, and also recognizing and identifying with the idea of being LGBTQIA+, which was also not what it was back then, is also really important as well.
Thank you. And has there been much generation or cultural gap that you observe within your family?
Not really. Not as much as I definitely observe it with other families, especially other Asian American or immigrant families, is something I definitely observe. I don't think my family had it as much. I mean, in fact, I observe it a lot with even the most in our my family, the people I find myself around, the most I observe it, I would observe it is with my cousin's family. So my father's brother's wife's family, which is definitely, they're much more traditional, and I serve more of a gap. I see them twice a year for holidays. But even, my own father's side, extremely, relatively liberal and very, very well educated and modern. I don't think the gap was, especially not the way you see it often portrayed in television and in movies and things, it's surprisingly no. I think relative to what I see either in other families or see portrayed in the media, probably have the least amount there. So no, not really, which is, I think, very beneficial to my upbringing in many ways.
Thank you. And how did you first develop your interest for fashion?
Lord knows. It's just been so long that who knows how it began. I know my sister was interested in fashion, and she introduced that to me, maybe through her. And I mean, I really have no idea. Really, if I could not pinpoint some beginning, I can pinpoint moments that became very influential to me, very impactful, but why I started even looking into this, or why I even started even opening that door, I cannot remember.
Does your sister also work in fashion industry?
No, she does not at all.
Oh.
She just loved clothes. Still does.
Thank you. And so you mentioned that you had an apprenticeship with the Houston Ballet. Could you elaborate on this experience?
I'm going to step back a little bit too. Part of the other growing up, and my father was an engineer, worked for Shell almost all his life, and my mother did something very stereotypically Vietnamese, which was she did nails. We had a nail shop, and I used to spend a lot of time there as a kid. When I was very young, after preschool, after they'd pick me up and I'd go there. So I think a lot of that was. I also spent time around all these women who were coming in to do their nails, and I would talk to them, and I would get, be my charming little gay child self. There's an aspect of glamour there, and then there's, of course, there were magazines there, because that's what people did before they had phones while they were waiting. They read magazines. and then while they're waiting to get their nails done. I wonder if that has anything to do with it, but again, I'm so young, no idea. In terms of Houston Ballet, that was my first real internship. I had already, but by that point, have been interested in clothes, in things, in fashion, but that was my first kind of experience. And my first internship was with the costume shop at Houston Ballet. I also loved ballet, so it made sense to be there. I loved ballet so much, and I loved and getting to be there, seeing clothes being made, really drafted and made and designed for the first time. I remember the pattern makers in the studio, because I interned under in the costume shop side of managing the costumes, and they were just organizing, and I was just a little kid, I didn't know what I was doing. But the other side was the atelier where they were pattern makers and people were making clothes. And I remember they were doing Carnival of the Animals, which I believe was a new Stanton Welch piece at the time. And she was drafting, one of the pattern makers, the lead pattern makers, I think, was drafting a costume for the Swan. And I remember seeing this, because I think I was already making clothes by that point. I was already exploring and making clothes. I was making clothes for my cousins up at this point, but this is my first time really seeing professionals doing it. And there was just this really beautiful, by now I look at it, it's very simple, and I know what it is, I can explain it. It's just, a fisheye dart, basically. But this beautiful black V-neck top, and it was just cut so beautifully and sewn so perfectly, and it was so quiet and elegant, and I was just like, oh my God, what is this? How do you do this? And I can understand her reaction now. For her, it was like, oh, this is just a very simple thing. It's very basic. But I was just so enamored by just the beauty of this top, basically, as I remember it. Which is funny now looking back on. I was like, oh, that's a very simple thing. But back then I didn't know anything. I was just, using what I had learned in geometry class and tried to just make patterns of some sort, just making clothes, trying to dress a body in some way. But it was just so beautifully done and so perfect. I was so impressed in that moment. What was your question?
What was
about the Houston Ballet?
Yeah.
It's just being around all of that and people who had chosen to work in this field as a profession, I think for the first time. That was really important. And also just being at the ballet, which is magical. And I continue my relationship with the Houston Ballet to this day, which is great.
Did this experience motivate you to pursue a formal education at Parsons?
I would say it's part of it. I think that was, if I wanted to do it, I was going to pursue it anyway. It just gave me a touch of that experience. And again, seeing someone who had such skill and mastery in their craft to make clothes and to, whether it was making patterns or drafting or sewing, I think could obviously have only driven the point further of how much I had to learn. But I think I already knew that. So whether my experience with the Houston Ballet is the reason, no, I don't think so, but it only helped solidify, that this is something I loved and that it's something I wanted to pursue. And of course, what do you do when you want to pursue something? You learn about it. You go to school for it. So I did.
How did Parsons help you grow as a fashion designer?
Well, it taught me. I took some sewing classes. I spent a lot of time, before when I was in high school, I took sewing classes. I spent time at the fabric store learning. I was making clothes, and even at St. John's, which is where I went to high school, which was very beneficial for me. They allowed me, at that time, they had a program called ISP, Independent Study Project. I actually developed my own course of study in high school to study fashion. And so to have a school, even in high school, that allowed me the freedom and the birth to do that was already incredible. So I got to really already start to have an academic approach to fashion in high school, where I started to learn the history and had the guidance and the structure provided by the amazing teachers who were there, while also like making clothes and making it a part of my curriculum. It wasn't just on the side anymore. It was something that I incorporated into my studies starting in high school. So going to school was a natural progression of that, because that I was also teaching myself. It's your independent studying. By the time I got to Parsons, I'd already had my first runway show in high school with there were clothes. Weren't the best made clothes, but there were clothes. And I had been making clothes for my friends and my cousin, and I made so much clothing for my cousin. She was very patient with me as I learned how to do this, and my aunts helped me sew because I wasn't a great sewer then. But I still was sewing, and I learned how to sew, and I was in whatever way making my own patterns. And so Parsons helped to formalize all of that and to really teach me formal skills of how to actually do these things, to approach fashion in a way. It was a formal education. And I didn't only go to Parsons, which is a very interesting thing. I went to the New School, and I got 2 degrees. I got a BFA and a BFA. My BFA was in fashion design from Parsons, and I got a BA from Eugene Lang in the arts. It was a liberal arts degree, and I studied science and dance. And that was great because it helped me to continue pursuing my passions and things that I was interested in outside of just fashion. Interestingly, for most of my life, I was singing. And when I was about to graduate high school, I really had to decide, what was I going to do? I had 3 great loves at that point. Technically 4. I still do. I love food. I've always loved food. I think a lot of my family for a long time always thought I would go into food and become a chef or become a restaurateur. But I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. I loved dance deeply, ballet so much. I started dancing definitely later. I didn't really start studying ballet till 9th grade, but I started dancing a little earlier. But really studying ballet. But the fact of the matter was my body was not correct for it. My feet were not right for it. I think if I had fully devoted myself to it, maybe I could have gone somewhere, but I don't think I was in the next Nureyev, and I knew it. So I still loved it very much, and I'm so happy I was able to continue studying it in college. But it wasn't my career path. Singing I had done for most of my life. I was, dare I say, pretty good at it. I certainly had done it much more than I had done fashion. Fashion at that point was relatively new. I'd only kind of started making clothes in high school for people and exploring this, and I'd had my ISP, but I'd been singing since I was in 1st grade. And I'd been taking vocal lessons, and I'd been doing all of this, and I'd been training. And so the great decision was what do you want to do? Because you do have to decide. Was I going to go to conservatory? Was I going to go to design school? Was I also going to just go to college first and figure it out later? Because you do end up in this cycle, or in this, I don't know what to call it, this situation. No, it's this context. I don't know what else to call it, but that you go to college. Finish high school, you go to college. You get a degree in things that you can get a job in. And that didn't necessarily come from my family side or the Asian American side, which was there. I mean, you go to college, there's that expectation, but also because I went to St. John's, an amazing school. But what do you do after you go to college? Not that many people from St. John's pursue creative careers after, when they go to college. So there's a lot of overlap with either St. John's or often a lot of traditional immigrant / Asian American expectations, go become a lawyer, a doctor, go business, anything. Lucrative careers, not artist. Because most people who did want to become artists, or whether it was performing arts or fine arts or whatever, didn't stay at St. John's. Like, why would you? Why would you need to do that? But I also love to learn. That's always been great for me. So at that point, I was like, I had this expectation. There was still this idea that, I'll go to college, like just like everyone else, and then deal with it late. Then maybe I'll go to fashion school, or maybe do something, but just to go to college and have that experience. And that's how I ended up at the BAFA program at the New School. Not a lot of students like me roll through St. John's, but we have they were so amazingly supportive, and we have an amazing college counseling program there, and they recognized that, and I still need to thank them and give a lot of props to the college counselor there that I had, Mr. Rutledge. He recognized that I needed something different than what all the other students were getting. So he made a call, I'm sure, and made sure that the New School, which never comes to St. John's, that's not really on their circuit, came and talked to me. They were only there to talk to me. They're not there to talk to any other students. Or I got a call, or at least it was a phone. I don't know if they came or it was a phone call, but I learned from talking to either an alumni there or a representative from the school about the BAFA program, which allowed you to get a BA and a BFA concurrently. Because I never necessarily wanted to give up going to college and just getting a liberal arts education. And so I was considering delaying studying fashion or whatever it was until after, but then I learned of this program that you can do both at the same time at this school. And that's how I discovered the program, because I was looking at other schools where I could get a liberal arts degree and then study dance on the side and then maybe do fashion after. I wasn't sure. Fashion was very new. And whether I was going to sing or not was a whole nother issue. But it boiled down to the difficulty of the decision was, do you sing? This thing that you've been doing almost all of your life. You've trained hours and hours, like endless hours before already, that I've devoted my life to, that I did love to do, that I was good at. Or this new thing that I also loved, but it was very new. I didn't know if I was good at it. No one could tell if I was good at it. It was so new. And with the vocal thing, I remember my voice teacher at the time. I actually used to take voice lessons at Rice. One of my teachers was in the music program at Rice, and so I would come here for my vocal lessons after my ballet lessons. They can't tell you what's going to happen with your life, with your career, with your voice. They said, you're going to have a big voice. That seems pretty evident. That means beyond, there's still so much development left to do. So I had to really think about it a lot. And what I felt was that there was just something in my throat when I sang. I wouldn't even call it an itch. It's just a feeling, a tingle, a tinge. What I felt at that time was that thing I was feeling was going to be the thing that held me back. Because if I was going to be a singer, I wanted to be the greatest singer. If I was going to pursue that career, I wanted to be the best. In everything, I always just want to be the best. That's how I've lived my life. And I just kind of felt that whatever I was feeling might be the thing that was going to hold me back. But that I had a feeling that fashion could be the thing for me, that it could be limitless. I didn't know at the time, obviously it was still very new, but that's how I ended up kind of deciding to go in that direction. And then going to Parsons and getting that formal education and really going to art school essentially in New York, while also getting to get a liberal arts degree and still continue learning all these other things that wasn't just fashion related. And it gave me such a well-rounded approach to study, to design, to learning. I loved the BAFA program because I wasn't just taking these required fashion courses. I wasn't just in art school. I was also getting to take dance classes. I was also taking classes about physics, which hated in high school, somehow loved in college. But more than anything, the degree I got at Lang was called Arts in Context, where you get to study a fine art and a liberal art at the same time in conjunction with each other. And a lot of it was about contextualizing art and learning about art, not just dance and science, but like aesthetics as a whole or art as a whole. And getting to have that critical theory side of fine art or looking at art, I think was very beneficial to me and to how I grew as a designer. So it wasn't just Parsons, which was also amazing. I learned from wonderful teachers. I learned lots of amazing skills and formal techniques, but also in conjunction with that, learning a more academic and theoretical approach to art and theory was really what helped round that part of my education out. And it was really, really amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better way to approach learning what I wanted to do at that time. That's a very long answer.
Thank you so much. And could you like elaborate more on how does like science and like dance influence your like fashion philosophy? Or did it
everything influences you.
Mm-hmm.
And I later became a teacher and I tried to teach what I learned, or the way of looking at design in the world that I gained through that, and it's been very difficult. It's not something that a lot of students were able to get, I think, but it boils down to your creative universe, your universe as a whole influences your design. Design and creation of work is so personal. So everything that you have taken in, that you've learned, that's in your mind, it comes back out. It all influences you. But I think the thing that I try to take from it the most, that I try to teach, that I try to explain, is that there is something to learn from absolutely everything and from everyone. Everyone is a creator. I mean, I can't say, I don't know about everyone, but so many people, a lot of people are creators that people don't think of as creators. Albert Einstein is as much a creator and a creative thinker. He's one of the most creative thinkers of all time. In fact, it takes creativity to see the world in a way that has not been seen before, and to understand it, and to then digest that and then put it out into the world. So a theoretical physicist is as much a creator as a chemist in a lab, as much as a painter, as much as a composer. There are ways of approaching creation and expression that you can learn from everyone's approach. And if you can find a way to synthesize, or to really grab the essence of what that person or that creator is doing and why and what drives them, you can learn so much. It is unreal the amount that you can learn. And I think, of course, there is the product, which I think people often go to the product, the final result, as the thing to observe, to understand, to learn from. But the process is so much more important than even that. So if you can look at anyone's process and you can look at anyone's process of creation and learn from it and take something from it that can influence you or that can teach you something new that can affect your own processes. And that alone is like just such a treasure trove of knowledge. And so that is how I think people influence me. And there's also obviously product, like finished things that influence me. Anything can influence you though. And I think that kind of idea that absolutely anything can cause inspiration, anything can influence you, affect your creative universe, and that creative universe in the end is what drives your own creation.
Thank you. You also pursued a master's degree in Paris Fashion School. And how did your studying experience in Paris differ from your studying experience in New York?
Well, I've been very tunnel vision like my whole life. This is what I want. This is how I'm going to do it. Which, people often talk about manifesting now. It's become such a thing, manifesting. Well, what really is manifesting? And I think that's the question people do not ask. You don't just sit there and think about what you want and it happens to you. You start by sitting there and thinking about what you want. And then you need to break down how you're going to get there. And there are super macro goals to medium goals to micro goals to little nano goals, whatever you want to call them. But there's large steps to smaller steps. You break down how to get to each of those large steps. And each of those smaller steps need to be broken down into smaller steps. And then you end up with a little roadmap that you just start with a single step. But it eventually gets you, hopefully, to achieving those medium goals, into achieving those larger goals, and then into where you want to be. And that for me is what manifesting really is. So I decided I loved haute couture. I fell in love with couture through the work of John Galliano, really. And as a true millennial, this is growing up right when the internet was just available, and fashion shows were being, technically they were being live streamed because Victoria's Secret was the first to live stream a fashion show. But videos were being uploaded, and then YouTube came, and then there was access beyond just the pages of Vogue, which I also pored over. In fact, at St. John's, at the end of every month, I would go to the library and they would give me the copy of Vogue to take home because they wouldn't keep it. So I had a stack of Vogues by the time I graduated. But there was so much available to you. What was your question again? We were talking about Paris, right?
Yeah.
How I got there.
How does your studying experience at Paris differ from your experience in New York?
Yeah. So this idea of this journey that it takes together, I was very much, I fell in love with the work of John Galliano because, now I could go to Dior.com and they would upload these videos. And the Spring Summer 2004 show, blew my mind. It blew my mind. It opened up a world to me that I didn't know could exist, that I couldn't even fathom what it was. It was just so fantastical and amazing, and I was just entranced. I remember watching that show again and again and again, just what is this? What is going on? It's just so amazing. And I became enamored with following more and more about these shows and watching them, and it was just so incredible. And that's how I started falling in love with couture, which led me to learn more about it. And then so the ISP I did in high school was really about haute couture, learning about haute couture, reading about it, studying the history, really learning more about it, and not just fashion, not just sewing, but haute couture, and really what this thing was, and taking an academic approach to it as well, an historical approach to it. So at some point I decided, part of that career was I would go to Parsons. I didn't apply to any other fashion schools. It's like, I'm going to Parsons. That's it. It's the school I want to go to. Luckily, I got in. And I was gonna learn, get my degree, graduate. I wanted to like intern for someone, and then I wanted to go to Paris and learn haute couture, learn from a couture master. Just to take that training and knowledge and then to bring it back and be an American designer. And at some point that was like what I decided for myself. So I graduated from Parsons, and then Eugene Lang. I graduated from, technically got my Eugene Lang degree first, and then I graduated from Parsons. No, that's wrong. I graduated from both at the same time, but I finished my Eugene Lang degree first, and then I finished my Parsons degree, and I graduated at the same time with both. Then I interned at Oscar de la Renta, which interestingly enough, while I was there, was when John Galliano had a brief stint there for 2 weeks designing there, and that was my first time meeting. Didn't really get to meet him. I saw him from far away, but I got to work on his designs. I got to work on his clothes there. And it was more than any of that. It was the first time I got to see John Galliano clothes in person. I remember it was before the show. I was in the first studio. We did the leather pieces, which I so excited to get to work on those. I'm bringing them over to the main studio, and the elevator doors open. It was the week before the show, and all these models were there dressed in their John Galliano gowns, and I almost died. They were just so beautiful and so incredible, and I just had never, by that point I'd been studying fashion in New York and all of this, but all these models dressed up in their John Galliano, God, it was amazing. He didn't end up staying at Oscar, but that only helped drive this fashion. There was something going on in Europe. I mean, we can only see so much on TV, on computer screens by that point, in the magazines. So I knew I wanted to go to Europe and study and work under someone to learn the craft there. But I had no idea how. Being an American, it was like, how are you going to get hired in Europe? So through some post-school activities, I had contacts at LVMH, and one was my mentor. She kind of helped mentor me a bit after school, and her name was Emma Ansel. So I asked to meet with her, and I just was like, I really want to go to Europe. I want to work. I want to study. I want to learn there. I didn't say I wanted to study. I wanted to learn there. I wanted to gain experience. And she was very honest with me, and she was like, most European companies were like, they hire from their interns. Like, you're not going to get a job as an American there unless you're extremely experienced and high, and even then it's very difficult, especially at that time. And so I was like, well, then what do I need to do to become an intern there? Because it's not like, internships in New York at that time were like, everyone's just slave labor. And now it's a little more codified, a little bit, but, it's freewheeling there. Like, no, but with French government, it's like, no, you need to have internships or contracts, they're paid. And, she explained how they're a contract between the school, a company, and the intern. So, because at that time, you needed that and you needed a visa. So you need to be able to have an internship, you needed this. So then the answer is, then you need to go to school. And so I said, well, where should I go to school? Well, the best school in Paris is EFM. So I said, okay, great. So I applied to EFM. Because it was like, do I go to Central St. Martin's? That was another, obviously, hugely famous school for fashion design, especially their graduate program. But she introduced me to EFM. I didn't know about it before, and I looked it up, and I applied, and I got in. And that's how I ended up in Paris. And I upped, and I moved. And it was, I had never thought about going to graduate school. at that point. I went into it thinking, I was so ready, but I just needed the visa, so I was there to get the visa so that I could, continue on. But I learned so much while being there too. And the interesting thing about the EFM program at that time, at least, it's a bit different now. Our current head of the program was like, this is a professionalization program. We spent one portion of the curriculum on the design in our graduate collections. We also spent a lot of it doing projects with brands, doing projects with the school's particularly famous for their management program, which was created by Pierre Berger because they saw a need for fashion and luxury management, like people trained in fashion and luxury management. So that was the bigger part of the school. We were the little tiny program. But being with them and learning a little bit about that side as well, but really they called it a professionalization program, which was really very different and really taught you how to work in the fashion industry and in the luxury fashion industry, which is very specific, and doing projects with these brands and still focusing on design. And it helped me grow tremendously and really prepared me on what it meant to really work in the industry. So that's Paris. I think you had another part of your question.
Oh no, that's
okay. I just talk a lot, so just yeah.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much. And so you also worked at Untitled Maison.
Yeah. So after EFM, you have to do your internship, which is why I went there, to get the convention de stage, so I could do an internship. But before that, through my other contacts, I ended up actually designing shoes for Prabal Gurung for a bit. Because I learned how to do shoes. I've always kind of drawn shoes, but I learned in EFM that we had a shoe program, and I learned I'm actually really good at shoes. Actually, I got a job as a shoe designer, even though I was not an accessories design program. So I ended up doing shoes for Prabal Gurung for a bit. Before then, I got the internship at Margiela. And, I had a very interesting period of time where obviously there's lots of brands. And I had a very specific and unique portfolio as well. So finding the place that matched that was also interesting. But I also approached it as this, I did this whole thing. I moved here, I had this plan. You get one convention de stage, you get one internship. And I was very nervous, worried that either I wouldn't get the right one or that I would choose the wrong one. There were a couple I did turn down because they weren't either I thought the right fit or the one that would lead me to where I went, or where I wanted to go. And I remember being on the plane to Copenhagen, I believe, to go visit the Saga Fur House because they had sponsored the furs in my graduate collection. They invited me to the fur house to have that experience. And that's when I saw the article that said John was going to be appointed creative director of Maison Margiela, and that he was taking the rumors that he was taking these designers who had worked with at Dior with him, and they were all working there together. I knew in that moment there was nothing more I wanted than to be there. I remember sitting on that EasyJet plane, just shaking, brimming with nervousness, excitement that this is the thing I've been waiting for. And I went back to Emma Ancel, again, who I knew because she had worked at Dior, which is why she was still at LVMH. And I asked her to please introduce me to the names of those designers that were in that article that he was rumored to be working with and to bring with him to Margiela, which she did. I never heard anything back. It was silence for ages, and I was like, oh, and I followed up. I messaged them again. I never heard anything. And then out of the blue, I get a message back. I think it was on LinkedIn. Hey, we saw your message, or from Emma. It was definitely because Emma had recommended me. And then I had an interview. Obviously this is a long time ago, I don't remember all the details, but it led to like, oh, let's get together, like, when can you come in? Can you come in now? XYZ. And I end up there with everything, and I remember walking into the house, like showing my portfolio, pulling everything out with Alexandre Roux, who was the head of the ready-to-wear, who was the head designer at the time, really, everything, and he became head of the ready-to-wear. And I remember being so nervous, and I think by the, I was pulling out skins, furs, drawings, everything was just everywhere. I gave it everything I had. And basically by the end, he was just like, great. When can you start? I wasn't even expecting that. I was expecting, but let you know. But it's like, great, sure. Can you start Sunday? And so that's how that happened. And they say a lot about luck. Luck is there for those who are prepared to take it or to grasp it. I don't know what the quote is, but being prepared for that moment, like when it happened, like you need to be ready to take the opportunities when they come to you, because they will continue to come to you. But if you're not ready, then you're not able to take advantage of it. And I'm so thankful that at that moment I was ready when the opportunity came. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And what was like the most valuable lesson you learned under training?
Oh my God. So many. I mean, the incredible experience to be working with an absolute genius, truly a genius. I don't think very many people can say that they get to work and learn from a genius. He is a genius. Means a lot of things. Was not always easy, but he was a genius. That alone, I mean, priceless isn't even the word. But then to also have that person be, in many respects, the reason why you became a fashion designer, the reason why you followed the career path that you did, the reason why you fell in love with couture, to have that person be the person you're working for, is just a dream that I could not have even dreamed it. To say it was a dream come true is an understatement. I don't think I could have ever dreamed that I would get to work for John Galliano. I just wanted to go there and learn from someone who did couture, learn the craft. Could never have imagined, especially at that point, I mean, he hadn't been working he had a huge scandal, he was out of the fashion industry. So to be able to be there and learn from him was incredible. Obviously, I started out as an intern, but this was right when they just started at Margiela, and there were not a lot of people there, and I became very close to John very quickly. And part of that, I like to believe, was because I basically had a near encyclopedic knowledge of his work. Because this had been my passion for so long. I knew, especially for such a young kid, and for someone who had never worked for him, the fact that I knew so much about his work, I think was very impressive to him, because he could reference something, he could say something, and I would know exactly what he was talking about, because he likes being around people he knows that he's worked, especially at that time. And that I had all of that reference and all of that knowledge, obviously not that background knowledge, but from what I could have, I think it was very impressive, especially for such a young kid. And that helped a lot, and we became very close, and I ended up becoming his first assistant, and spent pretty much every day of my life with him for 2 years. There's not a way to say I learned one valuable thing. I mean, the value what I learned is just incredible, like beyond. But I think I often say it's just that creativity is the most important thing. That you can do anything, you can achieve anything if you're creative. Like, you don't need a ton of money. You don't need the end of the day, creativity is the thing.
Thank you. And you made the decision to return to New York in 2019. It's like shortly before COVID. And why did you make this decision? How did the pandemic impact your journey launching your own brand?
Well, back to my macro goals. I was like, I'm going to start my brand when I'm 30. So I was about to turn 30. And I was like, okay, I guess this is time. And there's a lot of other things that happened in between, but it just came down to this was the time. I set the timeline I set for myself. I was about to turn 30 in December. And I was like, okay, this is when I said I would move back and start my own brand. At that point, I had actually taken a break from fashion. I had been dancing again, and just, enjoying my life in Paris, which was wonderful, because to that point, I had just been working so focused towards these goals that it was my first kind of break. But it came down to, I was 30. It's like, this is what I said I would do. My dad also was not patient anymore with me not doing anything other than dancing all day. So I was like, okay, it's time to go. Let's move back. What I had always said was go to Paris, learn the craft from a master, come back, start your own brand, be an American designer. So I did. Little did I know I had misread my visa, because American European dates a month day backwards. As I was leaving, I was like, oh, I thought my visa was expiring November 1st. It was actually expiring January 11th. So I actually also just got out of the country just in time as my visa was expiring, because I didn't bother to renew it yet. And it all just kind of worked out in that sense, at least. But I came back to New York and to start my own brand, but it took a little longer than I thought. When you get used to having a whole team of people work for you and do things, it's a little different than doing everything yourself, especially starting a company and doing all these things. And this is when I really had to start to learn what it meant to be an entrepreneur, aside from a designer. So it took a little longer than expected, which is good and bad, because then I did not launch before COVID happened, because had I launched before COVID, I think it would have been a real disaster, because as we all know, the world shut down. And so I was just stuck in COVID, and I didn't have anything to do, and I just kept slowly working on the brand. But when you don't know when anything is going to happen, like, how much do you really work on it? So I was just slowly moving around. I kept teaching more, because I moved back and I started teaching as well, and I just kept teaching more. And then at some point we were like, okay, COVID is, we're out of the thick of it, and it's just time. So that was kind of mid-2021 when I was like, okay, it's time to go. Finished up that first collection, put it together, got ready to launch, put PR teams in place, and we finally launched October 20th, 2021. Was the day I opened the collection to the public for the first time. Launched my collection. Officially, the first meeting was Vogue. Unofficially, Taylor Swift's stylist came in the night before while we were setting up, because he couldn't come during the whole thing. But officially, the first meeting on the day that we opened the collection was Vogue. Which it does help, I think, to say that when you're John Galliano's first assistant, to get the attention. And it's crazy because I didn't get to practice at all then. It's my first time doing it with anyone. The first time was going to be Vogue, and not just Vogue. Like, the director of Vogue Runway, Nicole Phelps, was coming. I was so nervous. I can't even imagine in this moment how nervous I was. I was gonna throw up the whole time. But she came, 9 a.m. I talked about the clothes, I brought it there, and then my publicist went outside with her, and he comes back in, he's like, we did it. They will give you your first feature. So my first feature, she said she needed some time because they had some other things, but for the rest of the 3 days, it was just fun. We were just meeting people, introducing myself, but we knew that our first feature was going to be in Vogue. And finally, the feature came out, and not only was it an incredible feature written by Nicole Phelps, they gave us center front page of Vogue.com for 24 hours, which was unreal to think about. Like, I just kept refreshing it to be like, is this real? Like, is it still there? But yeah, for 24 hours, it was the lead story on Vogue.com, right in the middle, got pushed out to everyone's newsletters, and that's how the brand was launched, which is, you can't really ask for anything more than that. But yeah, that's how we came back, and then it's been a pretty wild ride since then. A lot of ups and downs, and here we are 2.5 years later, being interviewed for this.
Okay, thank you so much. And how would you describe a design philosophy for your brand? Why did you emphasize unabashed femininity and irreverent glamour?
So unabashed femininity and irreverent glamour, two kind of the big things we use as the pillars of the brand. But it really starts with my quote-unquote manifesto of, I just want to help women feel beautiful. I believe clothing has this very special power to make someone feel incredible. And you see it when it happens. Like when someone puts on something, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it's regardless of aesthetic, it's like when someone puts on something that makes them feel like they can take on the world, it is the most special, incredible moment. You can just see it in the way they walk, the way they change. It's not just about, for me, looking beautiful. You can look a certain way, but when you can use your clothes to help someone feel that way, it is very, very special. And so this idea of irreverent glamour and unabashed femininity really comes from my creative universe and the things that I love and the designers that I have been inspired by. And also my idea, my perception of fashion, which is very influenced, I like to think, by Texas, by the women I grew up around, by the girls I grew up around. And this idea, glamour is very real here. And it's funny that so many evening or glamorous designers come from Texas. Daniel Roseberry, Brandon Maxwell, Tom Ford, Jackson Viederhoft. A lot of people who are doing what is considered evening or event dressing, or that have this very glamorous aspect to the clothes that they do, come from Texas. And I think that's not a coincidence. There's something in the water here. But it's about the way women approach dressing and fashion and glamour here that's very real. And I find it very funny that, by the time I graduated high school, we'd gone to many formals. To think that a lot of, for example, a lot of students I went to school with at Parsons, maybe the only time they've ever worn formal wear was at prom. That's it. There's no cotillions, there's no all this other stuff that formal wear was such a part of our lives, in a sense. But also, again, this approach to glamour, and I think that is all of that really influences this idea of irreverent glamour, which really just comes down to the idea that glamorous dressing doesn't have to be taken so seriously. We love a red carpet moment, we love a Met Gala moment, but not every time you put on a gown has to be that. Some people a lot of these women just need something beautiful to put on that makes them feel amazing so they can go out and have a great time. And that's very alive and well here in Texas. And then unabashed femininity is just really about the idea that femininity can be strength, is strength. Femininity is strength. And the signifiers, these classic signifiers of femininity, can be strong. They can be like an armor. I reject this notion that, a woman has to like dress a certain way to appear strong, whether that's like an 80s power suit with broad shoulders, or adopt any sort of masculine codes to appear strong, like bows, a frill, the color pink. All of these can be powerful. They can be strong. They can be like an armor. I look a lot at even 18th century and these giant dresses that take up space. They impose themselves on the people around them. And it's just the idea that all of these things, considered classically feminine, do not represent weakness. They do not represent fragility, but they can be a strength. They can be like an armor, and to embrace them wholeheartedly. And I think a lot, philosophies, I love this quote, I believe it's a Balenciaga quote, and I'm going to misquote it terribly, but it's, to be, I'm just going to look it up if you don't mind, so I do it right, because I always get it wrong, at least the order wrong. And this really came about from my study of haute couture, which I even did in high school, which is a couturier must be an architect for design, a sculptor for shape, a painter for color, a musician for harmony, and a philosopher for temperance. And it's something I should probably remind myself of a little bit more. But that's I think a big part of it. And again, I'm such a student of fashion history. I love studying fashion history, and I love to learn from the people who came before me. And even this idea of irreverent glamour and unabashed femininity also really comes a lot from another great influence of mine, which was Valentino Garavani, and how he approached dressing and glamour, in the height of his powers in fashion, and the women he surrounded himself with, and the way he approached their lives and their needs, as did so many designers that I admire.
Thank you so much. And if there is a future for a modern version of traditional Asian costumes, will you ever go to that direction?
I think there's always a future. And I don't think it's so black or white. Again, everything influences you. Everything is a part of it, and it could be my culture, it could be Asian culture at large. Like, one of my now iconic pieces is this bomber jacket that I'm wearing, which has a kimono collar on it, fused with like a kind of very couture back shape that comes from like a cardan jacket. But interestingly, looking at my own heritage, there are a lot of Asians in fashion, both Asian American and not. Like the Asian influence on fashion is huge. Like the Asian market has always been big. There have always been Asian designers, especially there was a wave of Asian American designers that came when I was younger, and that I saw them and I looked up to them, and I could see that they were there. Like they had such a presence. But none of them were ever Vietnamese. And so, of course, there have been Vietnamese fashion designers, but I think that the first one that really, truly became a part of the mainstream fashion fold was Peter Do. And I think I'm very proud to say that I'm also on my way there, to have been two Vietnamese designers. And obviously Peter was born in Vietnam, and I was born in Texas, but we both are Vietnamese Americans in a way. Not in a way, we are both Vietnamese Americans. And it's interesting, we have both went to Europe and learned from very famous designers and came back. And his work also incorporates so much of his culture. And I remember his first runway show, which he waited ages to do, and it was such a big deal when he finally did his first runway show. The second look showed his version of an ao dai, which is Vietnamese traditional dress. It was knit. It was definitely like not one that would be immediately recognized by most people as Vietnamese traditional dress, but it was his interpretation of it. So when I did my first runway, which was last September in 2023, which was, I also didn't plan to do it so soon. My father passed away and I wanted to do a show as an homage to him. It felt like the perfect moment to also not only have that runway show, but as my first runway show, to bring my interpretation of Vietnamese traditional dress to the runway and to show that. And I think, again, I don't think a lot of people would recognize it unless they were looking for it. You don't look at it and you're like, oh, that's clearly that. But if you see it and you know to look for it, it's kind of amazing. And I know we have a Vietnamese actress who will hopefully wear it very soon because she recognized it as such. But it was my interpretation. So the question is, what is modern traditional dress, and how far away can you get from the tradition of it and have it still be considered that? If I tell you something's inspired by this and this is my version of it, like who has any right to tell me that it's not? For me, it's a tunic over pants, and that for me, that's the essential part of what ao dai is. Do I think Vietnamese women all over Vietnam are going to be wearing it to, on New Year's Day? No, I don't think so, because it is my interpretation. It is, but the question of what is a modern interpretation of traditional dress is very open. And so that question, I think it's always there, because not to say that you're always influenced by that thing in particular, but people are always influenced by the world around them, by their creative universe. And you can't necessarily divorce your identity from your creative universe. You just can't. Your relationship to that identity is different from anyone else's. What that relationship to that identity is and what you take from that and from your culture, your identity, whatever it is, that's personal to you. But you can't just ignore it. It's never going to be something that just is divorced and ignored from it. So whatever happens, whatever it takes from it, I think is always there, and it's up for designers to choose how they want to engage with that. But I think that will always, I don't think that's even really a necessary delineation. I think it's just, it will always be. And of course there's room. There's always room. Because it will always be there. Culture will always be important. Where you come from is always going to influence your creative universe, I think.
Thank you so much. And do you mind if we go over?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so we're probably going to talk about more about identity a bit. And
isn't that what we're really here to discuss?
Okay. So to start, how do you identify yourself ethnically?
I am ethnically, so I'm ethnically Vietnamese. I'm a Vietnamese American / Texan. Very, very Texan thing to say, that I'm just as much a Texan as I am an American, but of Vietnamese heritage.
Thank you. And what do you feel most proud of?
What do I feel most proud of? I'm proud of everything. I love all that I am. I'm proud to be Vietnamese. I'm proud to be from Texas. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud to be human. I don't think there's anything I'm more proud of than anything else. I think I'm proud of myself as a whole, because these are all parts of who I am. And they're all jumbled in there and are very important to me and my creative universe.
Thank you. And when and where do you feel most at home?
That's a more complicated question. When and where? this is the thing about immigrant identities. You are, in many ways, so divided amongst all of, as I said, I'm proud of all of them, but there's very few instances where I'm in a place where everything applies. When I'm in Asia, I'm an American. When I'm here, I am an Asian American, not part of the majority. When I was in France, I was Asian and an American and just a foreigner overall, not French. There are very few. Is there anywhere that I feel truly at home? I would say no. If anywhere, but also I don't feel not at home in many places. New York, wonderful melting pot of a city. I feel at home. I feel like a New Yorker now too because I've lived there for so long. But I also feel at home here in Houston and in Texas. But do I ever feel completely at home? No. And I think that's also very important to what it means to be, the child of immigrants, what it means to be Asian American, what it means to be here, to be living here. Oddly enough, and maybe it was because it was like after COVID, but I like to tell the story often about Hawaii, which was not to say that I felt completely at home there, because I'm not from Hawaii, but it was one of the only times I felt pretty, in at least a superficial sense, at home. I think when we talk about how do I feel at home in Houston or in New York, or these are deeper questions of what it means to feel at home, but superficially, I was very shocked at how at home I felt in Hawaii because I didn't expect it. And I don't think people discuss enough about this. So Hawaii is very interesting, and I'd never been there until after, they just opened up for COVID, and I was like, I'm going to go. My friend invited me to go, and I went. It was so interesting to be in a place that in many ways was very American. They have very American, aside from obviously Hawaii's gorgeous, it's paradise, there's beauty everywhere, it's, stunning tropical island, but really talking about the culture and the of Hawaii and what it means to be there, aside from just the beautiful beaches. You're very much in America. The infrastructure is very American. The street signs and the highway signs are American. They look like in America. They look like as if I was driving just down the street here in Houston. They're the same signs, the same kind of infrastructure. And also having lived in France and lived in and traveled in Asia and Europe, that countries and they all have their own infrastructure, the way they organize things. It's very unique to whatever the urban planning of that country or of that location. Very, very American in Hawaii. Shockingly so, because you're on this beautiful tropical island, but then it's like the same street signs, the same way the highways are built, the same way the roads are built, because it's America. And you have these strip malls, very American, with just like you're driving down Westheimer here, like strip malls it's just a way of organizing that was very, very American, and you're using American money, which you'd be very surprised at how much just even the currency you use is very significant in how you identify with a place. But here we're using American money. Everything has a very American feel, these big parking lots with strip malls and these street signs, and everyone speaks English, but everyone is Asian. That was really an interesting experience for me, that the locals there were Asian. Obviously they're South Pacific, but obviously with Hawaii you have a lot of different Asians that come there and live. But the thing was, the majority of the locals looked like me, but they were also American. They also used American money, and they also lived in a place that was very distinctly American. And it didn't help that they also all loved the same food that I love, because Asians love food. And I could eat spam musubi every day. They loved Asian food, was everywhere, but it was such an integral part of the culture because that's what the people who lived there ate. And fruits and all. It was just such an... And I realized for the first time that I was in a society, I was in a place that was actually, in many ways, the only Asian American culture bubble. This is a place that is deeply rooted in both being Asian and American, and that was the majority. And again, I speak about this in a very superficial way because obviously I'm not Hawaiian and I don't connect with them in that cultural sense. It was just in a very superficial sense to be whether, as opposed to going to Vietnam where I'm still an American, or or going to anywhere else. It's I was in a place, in a culture where the majority of people and the customs and the things around you, everything was very rooted in being Asian and American. And that I thought was more than the beautiful beaches, more than the scenery, more than all of this, was the most profound experience I had in Hawaii.
Thank you.
It's a very unique answer, I'm sure.
And have you ever encountered unique challenges or opportunities as an Asian American fashion designer?
I mean, sure. But I think everyone faces challenges. The interesting thing about fashion is that Asians and Asian Americans have been a part of fashion for so long that you're not really that much of an outsider when you're of Asian descent. You still are a little bit. And not to say that it's not, because fashion in general is still very much, as a whole, fashion is still very much led by the West and by Europe. I mean, really, Europe is still the leader for fashion, these big houses. But at least in the New York fashion industry, Asians and Asian Americans are a very big part of that industry. So that has never been somewhere I think I've felt like an outsider. And even in Europe, there are a lot of Asians working in the fashion industry, but there are definitely not as many at the top leading these houses or working in the boardroom. But I do think that I can't really pinpoint discrimination. Did it probably happen? Maybe. But not that I've been super aware of, at least. And Asians are just so deeply entrenched in the fashion industry as a whole that it's probably, yes, but I can't say that it's something that I felt very acutely have experienced.
Thank you so much. And what advice would you give to an Asian American who's new to the field of fashion design?
Work really hard. I think a lot about this quote that I had known from Tom Ford when I was younger, when I was in high school. If there's anything else you can do and be happy, do that instead. But if the answer is no, then go for it. It requires such an intense amount of work and sacrifice and motivation and drive and just endless pursuit. It's hard. It's very hard. And I am lucky in many ways to have had a family and a father who has supported this dream of mine wholeheartedly. They never questioned, my father never questioned, never tried to hold me back. He really allowed me to pursue this dream and supported me on that, which is just so incredible. You know, I read a lot about or hear a lot about other Asian American people who don't have that kind of support from their families because they try to push them into, again, doctor, lawyer, whatever. I never had that. And I'm so thankful for that. It also shows you like what you can achieve when you have that kind of support from your family. My father passed away last year, and a big part of my understanding of him, when I wrote the eulogy, you know, he originally studied to become an architect. He was working as an architect when, you know, the war ended, and he had to quit his post and support his family by selling medicine on the black market and doing whatever they could to make ends meet. You know, a very large family, and he was suddenly the head of that family after the loss of his father. And that was something he took on the mantle of his entire life. He moved here to Houston, went to school, got his degree, got a job, slowly kept supporting his brothers and sisters as they one by one came over to the US. And my realization, I think, was that, you know, he did all of that out of duty, I believe, out of love, out of obligation to ensure that his family, that his loved ones could survive, could thrive, could build a life for themselves, myself included. And what I realize also is that what he gave me was the freedom to pursue what I wanted, to pursue what I loved, to pursue my passion, which is something his circumstances did not give him. He was an immigrant, he had a family to care for, there was a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, and so he did have to do what needed to be done to ensure the survival of himself and his family and his loved ones. But in return, the gift he gave me was the freedom to follow my passion, to follow my heart, and to do what I wanted. And that is really such an amazing gift and such a valuable thing that I cannot thank him enough for, really. Because then you hear so much about the pressures of what it means to not just be an Asian American, but a child of immigrants, to have parents that are struggling to make ends meet, or to build a life for them, for their families, for generations to come. And that kind of freedom, that kind of understanding, that to allow me to be myself, to be who I was, and to pursue what I wanted, I think is such an amazing gift.
Thank you so much. And is there anything we'd like to share that we haven't covered yet?
I think we talked about a lot of stuff. I mean, there's always more, but no, I think that's a lot. I hope it's helpful. I think it's a unique story in many ways. I mean, we could talk about subtle Asian traits all day, but it can be very heartbreaking sometimes to read about how many Asian creatives are held back because of the lack of support from their family or pressures. And just to show that what you can achieve when you have that kind of same drive and support from your family, to pursue, you know, careers or paths outside of just, you know, the stereotypical.